Nicolas, you have to tell us, what time is it there right now in Boston?
It is just past 5 a.m.
Oh my, you're either, if you're an early bird or a night owl, I'm not sure. So either it's really, really early or really late for you, but we are very happy that you woke up at this time to be with us here at Shift Mobility. Welcome, and you're going to tell us now a bit about one of our favorite thought experiments, the trolley problem. So I'll let you take it away, Nicolas.
I'm sure it's some favorite, and I'm sure it's for others their worst nightmare. So yes, I'm coming to you from just outside of Boston, in the city of Lowell, which was the home of the American Industrial Revolution, which is where I live and I teach. And I'm here to talk to you about ethics and autonomous vehicles, and why the trolley problem is the right answer to all of the wrong questions. So for those of you who don't know, and I imagine, although I can't see the crowd, most of you are, the trolley problem has become a staple of discussions about the ethics of autonomous cars. And in particular, it was made popular by an experiment of a kind by the MIT Media Lab just near where I live, where they, using big data, ran a series of hypothetical questions by, I believe, some 10 or 15 million different people around the world to decide, in an unavoidable crash, what action do you think an autonomous vehicle ought to take? Should it, for example, swerve to save the lives of 3 elderly people, as you can see in the bottom right of the screen, killing all of the passengers in the car, or should it continue straight on and plow through these poor elderly people? Now, the ethics of autonomous cars has used the trolley problem since at least 2013. I believe Patrick Lynn's article in The Atlantic was you might call it the index case, given that we're all very familiar with pandemic language these days, of the trolley problem phenomenon. And such a phenomenon it's become that some folks, such as Heather Roth at the Brookings Institution, have suggested that maybe that we've gone too far with the trolley problem. And what I want to suggest to you today is that it's not that we've gone too far with the trolley problem, but rather most people never really understood the trolley problem to begin with, and so we've used it in all the wrong ways. So let's rewind to the original trolley problem. The original trolley problem came up, of all things, in an essay by a philosopher by the name of Philippa Foot in the 1960s about abortion. Now, the problem goes something like this. Imagine that you are standing near a tram car, and this tram car is out of control and it is hurtling down the tracks. The use of trolley didn't come along until after this initial thought experiment. And the tram car is currently en route to collide with 5 workers on the track. And you have a choice to either allow it to continue to do so, or to pull the junction lever, switch the tracks, in which case the tram will now go down another line and strike 1 worker on the track, killing them. And most people think that this is, one of these unavoidable crash scenarios, and indeed something that autonomous vehicles will face now and in the future. Just so you know, I'm about to be visited by my cats, so you may have a guest appearance coming up in a little bit. This is how most people conceive of the trolley problem, and they think that what it really is about how we value lives. And indeed, the moral machine folks at MIT, the way that they constructed their trolley problems, plural, was to give you different sets of people that you might want to kill. And they would suggest, for example, maybe you want to kill a grandmother or a cat. I'm hearing my cat just behind me right now. Maybe you wanted to kill the car's occupant or a person on the street. And they would give you different numbers and different combinations and different identities. And what they showed is that people really don't like animals relative to humans. And they also showed that people prefer rich people to poor people, and so on and so forth. But they didn't really get to what is a very specific thought experiment in philosophy, which is a question about our intentions and the way that our intentions align with our overall aims. And so In talking about the original trolley problem in 1969 in an essay, The Problem of Abortion and the Doctrine of Double Effect, which is a totally different conversation for another time, and I'm sure we would discuss that at coffee if I was actually fortunate enough to be in Berlin. I'm not, and I'm very sad about it. Philippa says, "It is one thing to steer towards someone foreseeing that you will kill him, and another to aim at his death as part of your plan." And she goes on to say that for the question of the trolley problem is whether the difference between aiming at something and obliquely intending it is itself relevant to moral decisions, not whether it is important when correlated with the difference of certainty in the balance of good and evil. So questions about how likely are you to kill someone, how many people are you killing, that's not what the original trolley problem is about. It's about how you align your intentions with your ultimate aims. And how you conceive of that relationship is morally important. And it matters what you think about it. And I'm going to give you two examples in just a second about how that might be important in autonomous vehicles. So we tend to use the trolley problem in discussions of autonomous vehicles to probe the value of different numbers of lives or the values of different kinds of lives. Do you think that the car should save the doctor and kill the criminal is one that the folks at the MIT Media Lab used in their experiment. But that's not what the trolley problem was designed to think for us to think about. And now that we know what the trolley problem was designed for, we can apply it in more interesting ways. And before I do, I just want to note that this is really important, not just in philosophy, but in every other discipline that uses thought experiments. My original training was in physics, and one of the thought experiments that I believe was actually designed in the great city of Berlin about special relativity involves twins heading in different directions across the cosmos, one at close to the speed of light, and measuring the time on their watches at different stages of their journey. Now, if someone were to use that physics thought experiment to ask whether or not the twins liked each other or whether they had a good relationship with their parents, physicists would tilt their head and go, "What are you talking about? That's not the point." And so philosophers should have, but didn't, tilted their head when people started using the trolley problem and said, "What are you talking about? It doesn't matter if it's a criminal involved in the trolley problem. What matters is our intention." So here's a micro example. This is a diagram of the junction in Tempe, Arizona, where a woman was killed back in, I believe, 2017 by an Uber, I believe, level 2 self-driving car, which didn't have its LiDAR on, which was part of the reason that it hit the person, but also its image recognition system was not adequately calibrated to look at a person wheeling a bike across the road in the dark and make a judgment about what that person actually was. So there's a question about how much risk we should expose the public to when testing vehicles from which they may not directly benefit. And I'll get to that in a second. Now, where does the intention to harm feature? So first, if we have good reason to believe we are placing individuals at risk of harm when we conduct what is essentially an experiment on the open road, and I'm not saying it's not necessary, but when we ultimately do this, then we have to reconcile the idea that we aren't just happening to expose people to risk, but we are choosing intentionally to expose people to the risk of harm for the purposes of developing our vehicles. Now, next, if deployment as testing is necessarily involves preventable risk to the public, then I think it's pretty safe to say that we intend to expose people to that risk. We don't want them to die, but notice again that Philippa Foot's example doesn't rely us to have complete certainty that someone will die. Just know that this is part of our intentions and our ultimate aims. Now, the trick here is that field tests require human-vehicle interactions by design, right? It would be a very poor test of an autonomous vehicle, ultimately, to have a drive on streets where there were no humans ever with which to interact, or no other cars ever with which to interact. That would be a poor experiment. No engineer would want that. And that's why experiments often require special moral justification, because we are imposing people to risks for the purposes of making discoveries. And those people that we are exposing to risks, they might not benefit. from our experiment. We're dealing with this right now all around the world as we think about vaccines in the context of the COVID-19 outbreak. Some people are not going to get the COVID-19 vaccine, but will still be exposed as part of the experiment to the risk of COVID-19. And that's why clinical trials, but also the experiments that we do with autonomous cars in the real world require a special form of moral justification. Now, maybe you don't think intentions matter. And indeed, some people don't. So, for example, there was an article in 2017 about complaints from employees at Tesla in dealing with their boss, Elon Musk. And one of the choice quotes that came out of this was that an engineer reported that when it was discovered that the rear-facing image recognition and LiDAR in the Tesla was not picking up small objects, bicycles, children, dogs, it was seen as a problem in the sense that the car might accidentally back out over one of these objects. And reportedly, allegedly, Mr. Musk said at the time that the risk of this happening was worth taking because of the thousands of people that would be saved if his autonomous vehicles were used in the world. So let's think about what happens when intentions don't matter. For the foreseeable future, autonomous vehicles will be quite expensive. The latest estimate that I've seen is that even with increased kind of cost margins, increased efficiency, increased mass production, the full stack for an autonomous vehicle is going to add up to $5,000 to a car. Now, I'm a cyclist, which means I spend more money on bicycles than I do on cars, but even then, as a professor, I don't see myself spending an extra $5,000 on a vehicle. Of course, there may be rideshare services, other ways to interact with this. But for now, cars are going to be quite expensive. Now, look at these two heat maps. The majority of road accidents happen in poorer countries. Why does intention matter here? Well, if we are constructing expensive systems, but those expensive systems aren't able to be deployed either for cost reasons or logistic reasons in the countries where the bulk of road fatalities actually happen, then autonomous vehicles simply can't save lives, at least as much as we might like them to, because they're not going to the parts of the world where those lives are being taken in the first place. So the question here is, what are we aiming at as part of our plans? Now, I think, and I was asked to be controversial in this talk, and here's my controversial take. I think there's a high likelihood that some, if not most, kinds of autonomous vehicle research is not well aligned with the broader goals that autonomous vehicles are meant to achieve, such as road safety. I don't think that autonomous vehicles can't solve these problems. I just think that the ways that we are currently pursuing autonomous vehicle research isn't well aligned with that ultimate goal. Now, I'm sure there are people in the crowd, and I do wish that I was here for the crowd, who are going to say, well, autonomous vehicles will get cheaper, they'll be distributed around the world, things will work themselves out eventually. But I want to caution you on that. I live in the country that invented the internet, or at least likes to say that they invented the internet, and yet more than 20 million Americans don't have access to the internet in the year 2020. And another 20 million Americans currently don't have access to the internet because they were accessing the internet through places like public libraries, places that are currently shut due to the pandemic. So if in the year 2020, almost 20% of the country that invented the internet doesn't have access to the internet, then we have to think about how much natural technological diffusion can actually get us to our goals. The other case example that I will use for people is that AZT, the first antiretroviral for HIV/AIDS, was emergency approved in the mid-1970s. And yet today, some 30% of the world still doesn't have access or routine access to antiretrovirals for HIV, which is why we have not eradicated, one of the reasons we have not eradicated HIV. So we can't just trust that the technology will somehow magically find its way into the hands of people who matter. If we care about our ultimate aims and we intend to bring them about, we need to structure not just our research, but our development phases with the actual people who could benefit most from these in mind. And with that, thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to questions. I am on Twitter if you want to come and pick a fight with me on Twitter, I'm always happy to do so. I will be up all day, every day, because apparently I don't sleep anymore thanks to this pandemic. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Nicolas. I don't want to pick a fight with you, but I do have a question about one of the examples you gave us about Elon Musk, and you touched upon this as well. Why is it, do you think, that in the creation of some of these technological innovations, especially automated driving, that we don't really think, or at least those who are creating them, don't think about the end product, the end user, and the impact that that could have? So quite literally about road safety. I mean, what do you think that disconnect is? Because when it comes to other technologies, we do have to think about that safety.
So I think that there are two possible reasons. One is that I think that we do care about end users when we design the current generation of, let's call them autonomous vehicles. They have some sense of autonomy. We are thinking about the end user, but the end user at the moment are the people who can afford to be part of this grand experiment that we're taking on, which is this limited autonomy phase, right? I think Tesla deeply cares about people who can afford to buy Teslas. They don't care about people who can't afford to buy Teslas, like he says, pointing at himself. I think the other big thing as well is that, and maybe this is two of three, the autonomous vehicle space has been an entry point for new kinds of companies than the traditional OEMs into the automotive space. Right. One of the reasons I am sad to not be in Berlin this year is because I genuinely enjoy interacting with my colleagues at Audi, at Volvo, at BMW, at Mercedes-Benz, because they have a very different view of autonomous vehicles to the people I interact with in the United States, for the most part, which is people from Waymo, from Uber, from Tesla. These are not traditional OEMs, and so they are not necessarily thinking with the same kinds of values in mind. And finally, production cycles are what they are in highly competitive commercial capitalist adventures. We are having this problem in COVID right now. If you want to design a vaccine for COVID for the world, you need to design something, for example, that can deal with the fact that most of sub-Saharan Africa doesn't have a reliable cold chain. They can't store vaccines at minus 80 degrees Celsius. If you are in the United States and you're only designing for people in the United States, maybe that's not such a problem, although, trust me, it is in some parts of this country. So I think that, again, this is just part of the fact that in many countries, autonomous vehicles are not a priority for governance and for governments to get involved with. And that's not true for all countries. Places like the Netherlands, places like Sweden and Finland have components of their government that are willing to put in money and resources to design products for their people. But that's not a global initiative just yet.
Okay, really interesting. That aspect of inclusivity is one we're going to touch on through the course of Shift Mobility, so I'm glad that you brought it up. And perhaps a question to your work. You are a philosopher, right? A professor of philosophy. What role do you see for philosophy in the development of new technologies? Because you also work on questions of national security.
I do. So the three problems that I'm looking at, and I can't speak necessarily for the rest of my colleagues, so I am doing some work on algorithms. We have a paper that's under review when we're talking about how you should program kind of moral considerations or moral frameworks at the level of designing autonomous vehicle navigation algorithms. So we are doing some of that nitty-gritty stuff. My co-investigator on my National Science Foundation project is a civil engineer, so he thinks about this nitty-gritty stuff. I am doing work at the level of policies, such as how we think about accessibility laws in different countries, and how we make sure that one of the claims about autonomous vehicles is that people who currently can't drive on the roads will be able to navigate the roads in personal vehicles again. So we need to make sure that the law actually allows for that, because right now, for example, in the United States, if you don't have a driver's license, even if a level 5 car appeared tomorrow, you still couldn't drive it, be a passenger. And then finally, on the national security side, I am very interested in cybersecurity standards. And again, the way that we start with cybersecurity in mind when we build these cars. The internet was designed predominantly for a group of people who deeply trusted each other. That was the United States military, and then the closed circuits of Stanford, MIT, and some of the other major institutions that created it. But no one created the internet ready for Reddit, and 4chan and
No.
hacking and cybercrime and everything else.